the last 15 years or 10 years of the internet has been like the adolescent masturbation phase, I think, like where it's like, oh, just me the people, ejaculation. Like that's it. That's what the internet's been like. It's a weird, strange place. I think we'll get to a point where we realize, oh, what we do and say has meaning.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is pretty simple: to support you in building rock-solid foundations, legendary integrity, and kick-ass relationships with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and a solid dose of some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I am your host, Mike Campbell, and today it is my great pleasure and privilege to bring you a good friend of mine, a former guest on the show, someone who's been on the show before in a different context. That is Mr. Nick Bradley-Qalilawa. Now, Nick, he's been on the show a little while ago. I can't remember what episode. We'll make sure it's in the notes. And he was on the show via a different medium, which is to say, when everything was really kicking off in the US with Black Lives Matter in early 2020, was it late 2020? Man, I can't remember. Anyway, this is my podcast, so do what I want. I wanted to have someone on a conversation where we could talk about race and racism. Nick is someone who is an Australian. His mother's side is Irish, generally speaking, by heritage, and his father is Fijian. And so he has this bridge really between two worlds, which is one of the things that we kind of speak about in this episode. And he's someone who, as a dark kid, experienced a lot of racism as an adult growing up in Australia. And so at the time, Nick and I, he joined me on Instagram and we did a live conversation around race and racism in Australia. It was a fucking remarkable and mind expanding conversation where Nick shared some of his experiences growing up and playing football and all those kind of things. If you want to listen to that, go back and listen to it. I wanted to get him on today because I wanted to also expand the conversation to talk about some other things. Nick is just this wonderful mind and man, and I love my conversations with him. And so I wanted to have another conversation and have you guys experience that. And so what's been happening in Nick's late of recent, which I'll let him talk about in the show, but he's been back in Fiji with his father, and they've been setting up some projects to do things in the village, really inviting the villagers to understand what they have there, not just kind of falling to this like almost Western trap of like go and work in a resort, get paid minimum wage, work all these hours away from your family, but actually see what is there and utilize the resources that are local in the village, and really bringing back that kind of village life, in a sense, that community aspect. That there really is the premise of the conversation we have about the power and purpose in community, and how we can bring some of, let's say, what is in the village back to the lives that we live. And so Nick's got this wonderful take on this. He's living it, in part, living his life between Bondi, the eastern suburbs, and the village that he's from in Fiji. Really bridging these two worlds, which is kind of how we start the conversation and where we take it. There is another point that we explore towards the end of this podcast, and that is Nick is in business with his ex-partner. And so whilst a lot of us aren't in business with an ex-partner, a lot of men out there are in a very necessary relationship with an ex, which is they're parents to children, and so they have to co-parent. And that can be something that can be fucking wildly toxic to wonderfully wholesome. And no one wants it to be wildly toxic, one would hope. But I think there's some real lessons in Nick's example of being in business with his ex-partner and how they go about that we can learn for us, be it in business or co-parenting, or simply wanting to exist with a person that we once thought was pretty fucking cool. So that's Nick Bradley-Qalilawa. There's me doing my best to pronounce the way in which you pronounce his name, the Q in Fijian. Otherwise, that's a show. So as always, hey, if you like this, let us know. Subscribe, click download first, and please, this is my a genuine request of you. If you have not, then please go to Apple. If you don't have an Apple account, take 2 minutes and set one up and leave us a review. Reviews are so powerful in getting this podcast in front of more men who can benefit from it, who will enjoy it, who will then take it into their lives and do something with it on that journey to becoming an everyday legend. Thank you. And now into the show. Nick, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast. Technically for the second time, although actually it's kind of for the first time in terms of the guise of this conversation. It's great to have you here, brother.
Thanks, Mike. I do feel like I've been in this conversation for a while with you. Maybe this is the first time recording in this guise,
Yeah.
this incarnation or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So look, I will have done an intro and I probably would have spoken all sorts of lovely things that I can speak about Nick. And mate, where I want to come in, hey, we live in a world of social media, and one of the things that we often do is like watch our friends, or maybe people that aren't friends, but we hope to be friends, watch their lives through social media. And one of the things that I've been watching and you of late is this journey kind of to Fiji, and in part what you've been doing there and stuff. And it made me think of this thing that you said to me once, which was something like, I'm paraphrasing you, so please steer me if I'm off. Yeah. For a lot of my life, I've been kind of one foot in two camps. Playing football, I was the uni guy. At uni, I was the football guy. Growing up in Australia, half Fijian, I was, in my white family, I was the Fijian kind of, and when I go to Fiji, I was kind of the Australian white guy. And it's given you a bit of a different perspective on things in some manner. So first of all, is that still accurate? And second, I really want to explore what you kind of, start to experience when that's kind of your experience.
Yeah, that's something crazy, Mike. We're like-minded. I was reflecting on this a couple of days ago, because it is an awkward experience when you're two different cultures, races, ethnicities, whatever, like all those things at once. There's a lot of navigating you need to do early in your life, and it's really tricky. And I know for a lot of people with Pacific Island backgrounds, it's something they struggle with when they get to Australia or New Zealand. You see it a lot, and it's really hard to hold on to culture. It's something that I know a lot of friends of my dad's that came out, they really struggle to be, come to Australia and be a working class person generally. Like working pretty hard, like most of the jobs that we're doing when we come from the Pacific, they are those tough jobs that no one else wants to do. Putting up with violence on the doors, picking up bins, working on scaffolding. That's where we entered the society, So you're coming in at that level, but you've got this rich cultural history. You're connected to a village, usually in a tribe, and it's really hard to convey that to your kids who are in Australia and they're still at the bottom of the pecking order. It's like, no, we have this 3,000, 4,000-year-old culture. We're like live in the nature. Like we have song, like it's an impossible task, and it's something that we as a series of cultures that are related have struggled with, in that. And I really admire my dad for somehow just keeping it in us,
Right.
And I also admire myself because I fought to keep that, whatever I'd gotten that. And so I'm still a part of my clan. I'm still a part of my Matangali. I'm still a part of the village. And that is increasing as I get older. And there were ruptures in that too, like there's ruptures with me and my dad. That ruptured me from Fiji. Sometimes it felt so distant. I'm living in the eastern suburbs in Sydney with, like affluent people who don't have an experience of any of that, and trying to keep that in your mind and to keep this culture alive inside of you and still navigate successfully through Australia, which is also my culture. Obviously, it's where I live and who I am. Yeah, it's challenging, man, at times. Definitely.
Yes. And, because the thing that I also kind of am ideating in that is like, we tend to, maybe my experience is we have kind of like the white, culture that has perhaps come in and overtaken. But what is lost in that is, the actual English culture and the Irish culture and the Scottish culture. We actually lose those a bit. It becomes this kind of like bastardized local whitewashed version. And like I think of my heritage, basically Scottish and Irish. Now I know some of those because I went and lived over there and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how even in there's still this challenge to keep culture alive and not lose it to something new. And also, you know, we want to embrace what's new, etc. But yeah, how challenging it must be, especially in a totally different environment, as you say, entering into a society with here's how we have to work, and this is the kind of things we have to do. And it's maybe a stark contrast to the history and the depths that is in the culture.
Well, it's funny you say that, Mike, because I'm also Irish. Like, I'm Irish Australian, and my family, my Australian family, we're farmers. We're from the Riverina. You know, we had a farm out near Junee, and we're Irish. And in Australia, that used to mean something. Like, and it was really, the Irish culture is really strong in my family. Like, we're still connected to our family in Ireland. My auntie Patricia came with me when I was a kid, and my mum and I in Camaray for a year. Like, we know our family in Ireland, and we're connected to the place, the village that we're from. You know, my grandfather was very much an Irish Australian. There used to be something called the DLP, the Democratic Labour Party. And a lot of Irish people who were working class were a member of that Labour, were a member of the Labour, a type of part of the Labour Party that split off and was specifically for Catholics who were having a really hard time in Australia. So in my family, on my mum's side, we're very much DLP, Catholic, Australian, Irish Australians. And we're fighting that battle to be represented, to have schools, to be able to get jobs in the government. That used to be a thing in Australia, you know, the part of the split that existed here. But you're right, it got papered over very quickly into that's white. And now we've got all these migrants coming in, and the white kind of coalesced into something. But we have in my family a really strong memory. No, we're Irish. That's where we came from. So I grew up with both of those actually pretty strongly. You know, the Fijian from my dad, my relationship with our Irish background, culture, heritage, and the Irish story, Catholic story in Australia is very strong in me. Like, I went to Catholic school. I heard about the White Knights. I grew up with that lore and knowledge in my family, you know, Catholics in Riverina. Yeah.
And yeah, as you mentioned, you know, now, like, still happening every day with, you know, different kinds of cultures and stuff coming in. And we have this very simple message sometimes, which is like, you know, assimilate to the culture and so on. But yeah, I suppose the risk there is that, of course, we want people to come in and feel welcome and to celebrate perhaps what's here. But I mean, you know, anyone losing their culture, you know, that's who you are, right? Yeah. By and large. And yeah, you said that, you know, to your own experience, there's been fractures, you know, growing up, which shit is kind of everyone, right? But they all have their own flavor and so on. Can you tell us what that kind of looked like for you when there was this fracture kind of with this other side? Because obviously, if you're growing up mostly in Australia, I have to assume that it was perhaps easier, maybe that's not the right word, for there to be a fracture with this place in Fiji because it was also so far away relative to, you know, down the road.
It is. And there's, like, you know, language is such an important part of cultural identity. You know, there's a lot of ideas that can only be expressed in your mother language. And so as a kid, I had a lot more Fijian words.
Right.
You know, I'd speak with my dad and my brother and my sister. You know, the longer that we were here as a family, like, I was born in Australia, my brother and sister were born in Fiji, my dad obviously born in Fiji. The longer that we're here, the less Fijian that we speak, well, I speak. My brother and sister still had it, you know, because they grew up there. I didn't. And so there's a part that's about language, and that's why we stopped Indigenous people from speaking their languages, right? We're trying to break the culture. We're very, that's part of it, is the culture is transmitted in language. It's one of the beautiful things in New Zealand that they've managed to resuscitate, bring life back to beautiful language, and that's allowed culture to blossom again, right? So there's a piece there that's around language. There's also that, you know, my connection to Fiji was through my dad. And when my dad came here, he was very successful at becoming Australian. So he was well educated, speaks beautifully. He was trying to move. He didn't want to be part of the working class Pacific Island culture as much. He was trying to integrate in this new society, make it, start businesses, do the whole thing, you know. So, you know, in Fiji, my family are a chiefly family, which means that we kind of are in charge of my village and my district, Rara. So we have a very important village and we're a very important family. So I grew up always, not just as a Fijian, but as a chiefly Fijian person with the idea that I would be a leader in my village one day. So it's also different because you're expected then to go to university and study, and because you have to go back and be a leader. So there are layers to identity, right? And there's layers to what it was like. But for me, a lot of that identity, my connection to Fiji was through dad. And I had ruptures in my relationship with dad. He was working out here. Things happened. We didn't talk for a really long time. And so I started to get to a point in my life, like, you know, the part where you're thinking about family and who you are in the world and what it all means and all that stuff. And I realized, oh, like I'm from Ngalawaii. I'm from Wandradhia. We two villages are right next to each other. You know, like I know I'm from Natasiri. I know where I'm from. Like I was brought up with that. I know where my family is. I can close my eyes and see the river. But my conduit back to that is my dad. And more than that, like not just like I can get there. I know where the village is, but there's this undone thing in our relationship that needs to happen. There needs to be this rupture, needs to be repaired, not just for me, but for the rest of my family as well. And so that was it's been a long journey, man. Like my dad lives with me now. He moved in coronavirus, you know, that was a really big step and big deal for me. And so part of what you're saying, like me back in Fiji and doing these projects, the large story of that is the healing that went on between my dad and I. Yeah. That relationship that we were able to repair slowly, hesitantly, you know, and then the repair of that relationship has allowed the repair of the relationship with my broader family. So my mum and dad talk, they didn't talk for 30 years, you know?
Right.
We're all planning to move to Fiji and do some pretty amazing projects over there as a family unit. My brother, my dad, my mum, who, you know, my mum's in another marriage, has been for a long time, didn't speak to my dad for a long time. So the story of that, what you're seeing on Instagram, that really cool set of experiences, it's like, you know, we're 8-9 years into the repair of the rupture.
Yeah. So hold on, you're telling me that there's a bit more depth behind what we see on Instagram.
You got it, Mike.
Shit.
Who would have thought that?
Right.
It's not just pictures and nice parties.
Yeah, it's nice to remember that. Okay, beautiful. I love that. Right. It's an ongoing thing. You know, we're going to nourish it. Right. That's the nature of a relationship. It needs work. It needs nourishment. Yeah,
it does. And it's like really easy. No, it's not easy. Easy is not. It's easy to do, but it's not an easy thing to experience. Where you have a rupture in relationships, deep relationships, and it's easy just to look away from it, move what feels like moving on, but you never move on from the people that you love like that. If they're really like, if they've got a lot of stuff going on and it's dangerous for you, whatever, I get it. You have to leave that behind. But a lot of the time, it's not quite at the level of danger. It's at the level of difficult to explore, traverse, you know, commune with, and sit with, and it's a process, man. But that deep relationship's still there, you know, and it hurts not to be engaged in it if it's safe, you know.
Yes, yeah, and I suppose that's the nature of it, right? Like there's potentially more pain and discomfort, you know, to face the things. But look, on the other side of it is kind of that pendulum of the depth of richness and so on. Yeah,
totally.
So then talk to us about, you know, you're heading back into Fiji and there's projects and stuff that you're diving into. I'm kind of keen to maybe, explore any of it. But like, okay, so we now live in this world that's fast paced and it's this and it's expansion and you know, like it. And then there's different options, as it would seem, out there. And you know, I haven't been to Fiji nor to the village, but I suspect that there's probably a different pace of life. And I remember you saying something about, you know, like some farming practices that you're kind of getting back to. Like, what are you seeing as you go back to the village that you are clearly wanting to, you know, celebrate and perhaps expand? And maybe, you know, are there things that you think we can actually take from that without taking it, learn from?
It's something that we're thinking about a lot, is because we're going back to do projects in the village. And my dad was sent from Fiji like 40 years ago to come to Australia to study, to learn things, to go back to the village. And my dad's grandfather, who was the chief who raised my dad, said to him, you know, you're going to come back here in like 40 years time and you're going to be the chief to my dad. And my dad took that like, oh, I'm being cast out. But no, he was coming back to learn stuff. And honestly, my dad and I is like a type of bridge. Like my foundation's in Australia, but I'm bridging back to the village, and dad's foundation's in the village and bridging to Australia. And it's between the two of us, we can work out the exchange that needs to happen. One wasn't enough. It's you kind of need the two.
Yeah, nice.
Both of us have feet in both worlds, you know, but
we're
anchored in different ways. So what was your question, Mike? I got excited with
in terms of go for it. My question is, would you like to speak about whatever you're excited about?
No, but so that was the idea. Like my dad's a bridge, right, between these two things. And the thing that we're really sensitive to is the village is its own entity. You know, so we don't need to go in and change, fix, whatever. know, it's very much
Yeah.
a thing of like, oh, I have to be sensitive to the culture, my people's culture, and what's beautiful about that. But also, one of the things that has happened, I think, in Western culture, which is nice, very beautiful, is a mythologizing of Black people and
Right.
Indigenous cultures in general. There's this weird thing where we abstract the humanness, I think, from Black people,
Right.
where it's like, oh, put them in a museum. No, they want all the normal stuff. Like they want to have a family, they want to get education, they'd like to see, like they like the world, but they also like have a culture and a village, and the culture over time changes in response to technology, like every culture does, you know? So one of the things that we're really sensitive to is like, let's not go in and like just turn the village into a suburb from Sydney. That's not the aim. No, that's not what we're trying to do. What we are trying to do, colonialism like imposed upon us a lot of beliefs that we didn't have before. You know, we used to have everything that we needed was there already, but then it taught us, hey, you're not smart enough, you don't have enough stuff, you need to buy it from us.
Right.
You know, this culture is not good enough, and all these types of things. It's deeply ingrained in some ways that we need stuff from the outside.
Right.
A big part of what we're trying to do is say, hey, we have timber, we have gravel, we have land, we can grow everything we need here. With an internet connection, you can learn all the stuff that you want. If you want to go somewhere else and learn more, you can. But if you want to stay here and have a great life with your family in this village, we can make this more and more productive with the technology that we are learning from Australia or America or wherever else. And so that's kind of the job. These two bridges, my dad and I, is to go, how do we bring capital and technology to enhance the life of people in the village so they can stay and have families, you know?
Yeah.
And because village life is breaking up under the pressure of globalization and, you know, the whole thing, it's pulling people out of the village to go and work.
Yeah.
And particularly in Fiji, they go work in a resort, they get paid $2 an hour and they're away from their family for 60 days in a row, like fly in, fly out here, except for minimum wage.
Right. Yeah.
And we want to be a part of the solution for that and show, hey, we are the Indigenous owners of these resources. We have the license to them. They're ours. We don't have to give them away to other people. We're going to show our people how we extract it, how we run the machines, how we build this whole economy for ourselves, and then just live in splendor.
Yeah.
You know, we don't need to work. Like, we're not going to start making people work like they're in Sydney, like crazy people. No, like the culture we've always had, work 3-5 hours a day on the project in our village. We'll sell what we need to sell to the outside world, and we'll live here in bliss. That's the idea. That's conceptually. You know?
Nice. And so, you know, bringing those things in essence that with that bridge and the things from, let's say, Australia or the outside world to really, like, you know, empower those locals so they don't have to head out. So actually, you know, like, it seems like there's also a kind of an entrepreneurial element in terms of, you know, utilizing what's there and creating resources, creating, you know, home, future, all that thing for you guys to actually live.
Well, Mike, that's my job in the whole thing. Like on this side of the bridge is to conceptualize for Dad as well, but for everybody, the value that's there.
Right.
Because I'm going in, like, that's my village, but I've been back to the village, let's say 10 times in my life, right? Like maybe more. I don't know. My dad grew up there, so he sees it like differently. But I see it like, oh, opportunity.
Know? And I suppose if there's that deeply held belief, like you said, like, hey, all the stuff that you have is simple and basic, it's not enough, and you need stuff from the outside world, then of course that taints how you see it, right?
Yeah, and also, like, I know, for example, that we have timber that's sitting there on the ground that we can export to China. I know that there's a timber shortage worldwide. My cousins in the village don't know that, and even if they do know that, they don't know how to get that timber from our village to the port to China. Right. I can figure that part out. I figured that part out. So there's just things that I can connect the opportunity in the village to the larger world so that we can live and maintain the culture.
Nice. And so then, if you were to, let's say, reverse this is just, I don't know, my head wandering, right? What's the bridge back, you know, coming into Australian culture and the broader world? What are those kind of things where you're like, hey, this is how things actually can potentially be done different?
It's really interesting, Mike. I don't know if you saw, obviously we've had the terrible floods in the Northern Rivers, and it was really a difficult experience. The Australia that I grew up in was a much more communal place.
Right.
We're all much more deeply integrated into culture and society. And that was expressed through the netball club and the football club and the RSL. And we were all really enmeshed with each other at a local level. the past 30 years, we opened up the economy, but we destroyed these social networks. Essentially, we try to monetize everything. The NRL became for profit. That used to be a community organization. It was football clubs, local football clubs. I grew up in that culture. We corporatized everything, which has some advantages. Like, people got rich, some people got quite rich, but we broke those communal bonds. And Australia, it still is, I think, we have like one of the highest levels of volunteering in the world, but it's changed. It's changed in the last 5 to 10 years. And so when the floods happened, there was a clip that went around the internet in general, but around Australia in particular, of a group of Fijian abattoir workers who are over here. I think they're working abattoir on a farm, I'm not sure. And they looked out the window and said, "Oh, it's raining, there's a flood, we got to go do something." And like 15 or 20 of them went and helped evacuate an old people's home. And they were evacuating the old people, and they're beautifully gentle with the old people. There was this connection and care. And then they sat around singing joyfully in the middle of the flood. And it really sparked something in Australians who were like, all these people were like, "Give them a visa, let them move here." And it's like, well, that's one thing that we could do. Or we can learn from the example, which is, these are really fit, healthy people, first of all. They haven't like allowed themselves to go to being sedentary like most of the country has. That's the first thing. They're fit inside their body. They can actually still have some physical output. They also know how to mobilize a group of men to something that has to get done. It's not just a group of individuals all working on their thing on their own. And on the weekend they climb off and they forget the society. Because in Fiji, like, you have to, because there's still natural disasters. The government's not coming for you. You have to work it out in Fiji.
Yeah, there's no separation, right? Everything is certainly interrelated. Yeah.
Interrelated. So the thing I think that we could get in Australia is something that we had. It's something my dad comments on. He goes, when I came here, this place was a paradise. Like, people were really connected to each other at a local level. It reminded me of being home. That's why I was really comfortable moving to Australia. Is like, now it's just about money. Like, really what most people are focused on is work, money, and status. These are the real drivers of our behavior. Even if you're awake to it, it's still like, "Oh, I got to work on the business, make more money." It's like, "Oh, what are you doing in the community?" Not much. You're thinking about it, you're talking about it, but like, are you doing that thing where you're putting the fence post up on the weekend at the football game? No, because you're too busy. So I think that's the thing we could learn from Fiji and also from our history. You were a communitarian place, and I think we're going to have to, because the climate's changing and the environment's changing, and the government can't be everywhere at all times. It's not that powerful. Can't do it. We're going to have to do it as community, like they're doing. They're discovering that in the northern right now.
Yeah, I mean, to see that, like, I've got friends who just before we got back from New Zealand, that's what they were doing, like all day, every day, vehicles down into the rivers, helping people, cleaning up mud, all the stuff, mobilizing the mud army, all these kind of things. And, a lot of that, I suppose that dialogue was around, like the government helping, etc. And it's up to us. And it's kind of, it feels like how beautiful was that? I mean, man, it's a bit of a shame that something so drastic needs to happen for us to perhaps have that. But at the same time, it's somewhat, makes sense that when shit needs to get moving, we're going to get moving, right? Because if there isn't anything like that, what are we going to buy into? But how do we bring that level of, at the very least, community back? That might not have to be as drastic, but as you say, if some shit hits the fan, then it's there, right?
Yeah. Well, I think like part of it is just buying back into the institutions that we've already created. Like we have, and we might need to create new ones, like for things like floods and fires, but there's an SES we can volunteer in. There are local groups that we can be part of. Like, the infrastructure's there. It just depends on how we decide to breathe life into it. It is my take. Like, I was involved in a community organization at the PCYC, and a group of us, a small group, like 3 or 4 people, just decided we're going to breathe some life into this place. We built a school for at-risk youth. There was Tomo created a really amazing boxing program, like reinvigorated. It was always a home for youth boxing, but he's got, like, it's full of kids again. And it was just Tomo decided, I'm going to go back to the community because I love boxing, and I know that I needed that experience when I was young, and I'm going to give it to these kids. And so one person just did that, and I think we have so many opportunities in community that are waiting for interesting, smart, entrepreneurial driven people to go, "Oh, I'm going to add something to that." Like, that's going to be my little piece in there,
and it feels like it, as you said before, it feels like it almost competes with this idea of busyness, right? And it's like, well, how could I do that? How could I fit that in? I've already got so much on, right? And I suppose perhaps, to one of the points, hey, well, maybe you experienced that as a kid. Now, you would have had a different lens, but you can probably see how powerful it was. And to maybe connect back into like what it has, not just for the community, but actually what it has for you, that what you get, the investment of being of service to the community, what you get back personally, and then obviously how that in the long run actually creates a stronger community, which you're part of.
It does. And I think we all look past. So like, let's say you do some stuff in your life, you end up successful, you start a business, you whatever. It's really easy to go, yeah, I did that. I went to uni and I studied it and I started a business. I did this thing. I'll give a personal example. Like when I was a kid, I had a single mom. My dad was a migrant from Fiji. So we weren't rolling in cash, Mike. My mom had me when she was 21. We're doing the working class family experience, cleaning office buildings before work, the whole thing. And I was a part of a junior footy club, Brothers North Sydney. Now that football club, on a Saturday or a Sunday, if you went down to the ground at Tunks Park, underneath the bridge at North Bridge in Camaray, if you went down there, Barry was there and he had one of those things and he was driving a stake in the ground and he was putting a rope around the stake and he was measuring out the field. That's at like 6:30 a.m. Pat, his wife, was setting up the canvas over the top of the sausage sizzle, doing the thing. And, like their brother and sister were also there cutting the oranges, laying the jerseys out. And they did that like every weekend of my childhood. They'd come pick me up from my house and take me to the games and do all this stuff. Now, I could tell you this big story about how me, this hero figure, overcame all these problems and turmoils and then became a first grade football player and went to university. And I could make that story all about me, but it's just not, because like it wouldn't happen without Barry. And Barry was a chippy. Like he was a chippy. He was living in housing commission. He had 3 kids. He wasn't rich. He'd work all day because I know he'd come to training. I'd see his hands all covered in dust and things under his fingernails. And the light would be coming down in the park at North Sydney Oval. Like if you know North Sydney Oval is, a beautiful park at the front. It's getting dark and Baz is out there teaching kids to pass on Tuesday after a full day working as a chippy. And because of that guy, I got to have this life. It's just how it works, man,
Yeah.
Not just me, other people. It's like hundreds, maybe thousands of kids went through that footy club in that time I was there. And I got to live this, I got to have the dream. I was on television, I played overseas, I did the whole thing. Never would have happened without Barry. Barry doesn't get the credit. Barry still lived and worked, in housing commission. I got to have that life. So I could claim it as my success, but it was like this community was behind me the whole way, people doing stuff like that. He was busy, he had his kids, he didn't have any money, So
and absolutely, I love it. And the thing that is also coming to mind for me there is this idea that I've certainly explored a lot myself. Certainly, I see it, all the time. And guys, there's this idea of lone wolfing it, right? Like I got to be the lone wolf. I got to figure it out. Maybe there's more kudos if I figure it all out and do it all out myself. And maybe there's the fear of if I get some kind of support or something, what does it mean about me? But even if you try and do everything yourself, it's actually foolish to think that you are, because you've got to where you are. Doesn't matter your environment. Even if you had a totally different situation growing up, there's still community around you. Everyone's got a different story, of course, but there's so many people who have a part to play in it takes a village, right? In the development of a person. That's so human.
Totally. Like there's levels to gratitude, for example, I went to Sydney Uni, beautiful sandstone building. Like it's amazing. And there's all these facilities there and there's everything like that. But when you really realize what happened was there's a lot of working people in Australia that paid tax for a long time. And that's how they funded those buildings. They never got to go to university, none of that stuff. I got to go there, but it was only because like 50 years before, the government was collecting tax from all these people working and they were contributing to our society. And we start to abstract things from that. We're like, we don't realize the benefit we have of these amazing roads. Like when I was growing up in Australia, roads were pretty dangerous. Like the road from Sydney to Brisbane was dangerous. We've spent like hundreds of billions of dollars so that we can drive on a much nicer road with road markings. They seem like simple things, but like that's our contribution to the society, so we can live in this safe, like awesome place. And then you can be really entrepreneurial, come up with an idea, list it on the stock exchange. But if you imagine like for a second that you did all of that, like you did, your effort as an individual, awesome, but you only got to that position because of all these people you never spoke to, don't know, and never thought about in some respects. And I've been a lone wolf guy. You end up sinking yourself anyway. Like you'll blow up relationships. Something will happen. It doesn't the lone wolf thing is a myth, first of all, but you're also missing, wow, I've got that many people behind me. I'm telling myself this story that I need to do it on my own, and I'm doing it on my own. It's like you're missing the beauty. Like I tear up regularly thinking about Barry. Like I'm like, man, that guy had my back when I was little, just because he's just such a great person. And like I got to live this life because of Barry and Pat. Like I get inspired by that. Why would you lose that for yourself? You know, and you may have had bad teachers, but you probably had some ones that did care about you and did give a shit, or a coach, or there were people in your life, man. And then if you can't see them, and if you had like a really one of those eyes where there didn't seem like there's many people around, someone came for you somewhere, probably. And if you're in an environment where when you worked it out yourself, like you could still thrive, you know, which is not the case everywhere in the world.
Yeah. And regardless, you also always get to tap into that now.
Yeah. You can tap back into it, you know, and it can still be, it's like a wind at your back. You're like, oh man, all these people, all this way did all that stuff for me to be able to even consider this right now. Like it's a pretty beautiful thing to think about. And, you know, it's been sad for me the last 2-3 years of, we've been so focused on ourselves as individuals and in our experience. It's hard to see, wow, so many like people in health are risking themselves every day to keep all of us safe. Like we turn it all into numbers and this and that. It's like, I saw this, I live at Bondi, and there's a big like where you go get the tests, the swabs or whatever. There's just nurses there all day, every day. Like they got really high level training, taking swabs, making sure we're safe. And I'm like, they were there on Christmas. They were there like on the weekend, just non-stop for the past 2 years, trying to help us all out, you know, and you could not notice that. And I think a lot of us missed it. It's like a whole huge part of society mobilizing to keep us safe. You can get upset at the government and all these different things, but it's like, are you noticing the levels of like protection you have here in this country? It's like, you know, it's a thing to see fully.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean, straight away, it's an invitation to gratitude, to compassion, you know, and potentially to like curiosity of like, oh, okay, well, how yes, okay, they're being paid and that's their job, but one, they don't have to do that job, and we don't necessarily remunerate them and thank them that well. But like, could I be bringing that energy, let's say, right, the keeping people safe, the looking after, even if it is in your work or some kind of vocation, how can I bring that energy into the world, into the community? You know, like I get this idea a lot where guys are really looking for purpose. I got to connect into purpose. You know, it's like I've got to have this one thing that I am here on the planet to do, and it becomes this giant expectation. I know we've spoken about it before in the past, but it's like it's also such a fucking expectation. Holy shit. But like maybe we can simplify that down, right? And it's like it doesn't need to change the world, but it might make an impact in the world around me. And how can I actually bring some of that, you know, and I love this idea of, you know, maybe borrowing from village life in a sense, because it just looks really fucking different now. But we are still in lots of big villages, right? And so how can I actually be a part of that? Because it doesn't matter what I think, I'm always extracting from it, essentially, right? I am benefiting from it.
We really underestimate the power of our personal example and how much that influences people. Like you could just go to work and be an awesome person, and it influences a lot of people. And you can also think about like, how do I live some of these principles and values in my work every day? How do we try and, you know, infuse that into the company? What does it look like to wrestle and struggle with that? Because like a lot of organizations, it's very hard to live your values. The wrestle and the struggle is worthwhile. And then the communication of that to others is really powerful. And all of us, even if we don't realize it, have this communication platform that no one ever had before, you know? Like I can put some stuff up about Fiji and it inspires my friends. I'm not trying to be an influencer. Like that's not my calling or whatever in the world.
No, but it's also a term that we've kind of lost and bastardized. It has a point, but you are influencing someone, right? And that's the thing. I can't control what someone thinks, but I can certainly have an impact in influencing them.
Well, I think like there's a new type of morality that will form or is forming. Like the last 15 years or 10 years of the internet has been like the adolescent masturbation phase, I think, like where it's like, oh, just do whatever, being the people, ejaculation. Like that's it. That's what the internet's been like. It's a weird, strange place. I think we'll get to a point where we realize, oh, what we do and say has meaning. Like what we decide to share with other people, we have responsibility around, because they might not know or have our level of understanding. And if they like us, Like we can influence them. So should I just be sharing some random website where I didn't check any of the stuff? I haven't looked at the sources. Like, I think in time, literate people and people that like who have values will start saying, that's not a cool thing to do. Like, drink driving is not a cool thing to do. You should share like rumors and things that you haven't researched, like it's authoritatively true, just because you had a reaction to it. We're going to have another level of emotional understanding about how we're being triggered by the internet, and not send stuff because we're triggered. If it feels relevant and timely and that people that you know need that piece of information, by all means share it. But if you've just gone down a rabbit hole and you haven't really learnt what that means, don't share it with people. You have a responsibility not to pass on information viruses. Like, you wouldn't go cough COVID on people. And I think at some point we'll start to evolve a new consciousness or set of societal understandings around, I am responsible for what I share. It's not all someone else's fault. It's not, everyone's like, oh, Facebook did. It's like, well, but we shared it. Facebook's just a platform. Like, you're sharing the stuff and then getting upset and sharing it to somebody else, and they're sharing it and you're sending it on a thing. Like, that's how it worked.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because what's coming to mind is, you know, like in my own world, you know, like I might be in my relationship, and as humans, we're such good meaning makers, right? And so something might happen, and then I'll tell myself a story, and some of my old insecurities and the shit in my past come up, and it puts the lens in which I view that thing. And then, you know, I tell myself a story that, like, my wife's pissed off at me or something. We love making a story, and we'll pass it on to our behaviors. And then we have this thing called Facebook, and that's also what we're doing, right? Like, we're meaning making and we're passing it on to other people, and the ideas spread. And like, I was just on a coaching call with some of my guys earlier today where we were talking about this kind of idea. And I was like, here's a really simple circuit breaker question, which is, do I know this to be true?
Yeah.
You know, like if we use this terminology, my villain, but just the shit in your past that has a voice that tries to keep you safe and etc. And if it's, you know, saying, oh, they left me, it means I'm no good. You know, do I know this to be true? Well, maybe it's a simple question that we can bring into all sorts of things, maybe like things that we learn on the internet.
Things that we learn, things that we learn.
And like, no, I don't know it's true. Okay. Do I fucking want to do the research to find out that it's true? Maybe I don't. So can I let go of it being a truth?
Yeah, totally. It just, and then, you know, there's certain words that need to get reclaimed, like research. Research is not going on the internet. Like, that's entertainment at best, you know. There are certain words that they need to get reclaimed, but it's a new technology. We're learning how to use it. Like, the same thing happened when we had the printing press. People were like writing crazy pamphlets that like the king was coming to kill everyone and the Jews are out to get them, and they're sticking them under doors. This is a thing. And then societies tore themselves apart until they went, oh, we need to come up with journalism. You know, you're going to put a mark on a piece of paper that lets you know this is from a company that does actual journalism. You can trust that source of information. Now, we've lost some of these things and we lost the tradition, and that's happened. That's true. But I think we'll evolve to the same thing on the internet, where it's like, oh no, you can't trust that random person with a Facebook group. That's not, you shouldn't be sending that. Like, don't send that to your mum. She's going to freak out and hurt herself. Like, it's not a good idea, you know? So
no, you're
we're just in one of those phases.
Yeah. And I think I'm reminded of, I think it was Ronnie Ching, the comedian, maybe he was talking about how the internet, like, who would have thought that all of human history could make us dumber? And at some point, we're going to look at the internet like kind of drink driving. Like, you can't, you know, get on the internet. No, you're banned. You know, like, it's so stupid.
It's totally big.
But I love that idea, right? Like, we're just in this little adolescent phase where we're just jizzing on everything, and like, maybe we're going to grow out and mature through that, and we might see like, oh, we can utilize and have a different relationship to this thing, and how we explore it and pass it on. And there's this other idea that I'm getting through all of this, including what we were talking about earlier in terms of community, because this is an extension really, and maybe even back to, you know, Fiji and the villages, this idea of being good ancestor. And I remember this quote, it's something like, you know, plant trees under which the shade you will never sit.
Yeah.
And like, if nothing else, there's an invitation there to be a useful human. Yeah, and get outside yourself a little.
Yeah.
Would you say that
doesn't need to be like this world? You don't need to invent like this invention and like build a company and like climb a mountain. You do that in community and family. Like, you can really, I'm always really inspired by my granddad. Like, he was 14 when him and his brother went out into the bush and just built a farm, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's crazy to think about. Like it was just, and it was like it was a piece that nobody wanted. That's how they managed to be able to do it. And they worked that, and they split it. Well, they split it between them, and they bought another farm. So they both had a farm. And then he used to have a horse and cart, and he'd go into town, and he would see my grandmother. Like now it sounds creepy, but my grandfather was 19, she was 15. Back then it was like, and he was like, I'm going to marry that girl one day kind of thing. And then when she was older, and my grandmother was like, he used to say, oh, do you want to lift to school in my horse and buggy? And she's like, I do not get into horse and buggies with boys kind of vibe. Like it was that old, like different life or whatever.
Yeah. What do you think of me?
Yeah. Like, what do you think of me? I walked.
What do you take me for? Yeah.
Wait, what do you take me for? I wouldn't get in a horse and cart with a boy.
Yeah.
And then, they got married, and my grandfather kept working on his farm. And in the time that he worked on the farm, he helped to introduce like new strains of crops. Like I think he was one of the first people with sorghum in that area, which is a really big crop in Australia. It had to get introduced. He was one of the first people in the area with a tractor. So he started to mechanize farming way before any other people. And other people in the district would look at him and go, oh, we could have other crops other than just this single crop. We could do multiple crops. Change the economic fortunes of people in the district. Using machinery changed their life because mainly it was backbreaking before that. And they started to apply these tractors and different types of machinery to farming, different types of headers, so they could harvest differently. My grandfather taught people in the district how to class wool. So all of my aunts in my family became wool classers. And it really was a part of Australia having a much more premium wool product in international markets. Woolmark and all these things came from farmers learning how to class wool properly. Now that sounds like nothing. And if you don't know farming or whatever, no, like that was a farmer going, how can I improve my life, the life of my children, the people in my district? I'm going to learn a skill. I'm going to pass that skill on. And my mum, like she earned her pocket money classing wool. And because she classed wool properly, it meant that the shearers and the people in the area, the farmers, all made more money because that premium wool went up to markets all over the world. So that's how you can change your society. And Australia made more and more money from agriculture. We're an agriculture like superstar because in many respects, we apply technology and machinery more efficiently than the rest of the world. My grandfather was part of that. You don't know, it's not in the history books. Like he didn't get like an award. No one gave him a medal, but people in his district knew. My family remembers, like we all know. And now my cousin Luke, he won the Nuffield Scholarship, which is like a very prestigious scholarship where farmers go overseas and learn the best methods and they bring them back to teach other farmers. So that's how in generations your influence continues. My son, my uncle Luke is my cousin Luke is my Uncle Peter's son. My Uncle Pete farmed with my grandfather. Lineage continues. So my grandfather's influence continues to Australian farmers today because my cousin Luke went around the world because he's such a good farmer and he learned all the techniques and he's brought them back here now. My grandfather's influence continues, but it was just a guy working his farm as hard as he could. Didn't need to do anything razzle dazzle, And so we can look past the influence and the importance of us living our life, working our job, being a good parent, coaching the local footy team. My grandfather was a rubber and a strapper. Everyone in the district knew him in Temora Dragons. If anyone's watching that understands rugby league in the bush. Yeah, Temora Dragons. That's what influence is. And especially for guys, we think we're going to make $1 billion and like, you know what I mean? Do all this stuff. And it's like, no, be an awesome dad, be awesome at your work. It has influence.
Yeah, I love that. And also it brings to mind this idea, like we feel like, I got to do the things. I got to do the things. I got to do the things. And we miss that. At the center of that is, who are you choosing to be?
Yeah.
And how you're being is what influence all of that. Right. And so what you might not have the point of clarity on how you can do that right now. Like, okay, good enough for granddad. Fucking all that technology was about to come out. Like, but he was choosing to live his life in that way. Right. It's who he was being that allowed him to do those things. And I think that's really, so important often to connect to. We might sit, and there's a lot of power in sitting, but in action and really struggling with this idea, it's got to be this thing and what I got to do. But actually, who do you want to be? First of all, let's start there.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Who do you want to be? Just keep showing up like that. And sometimes it's hard. Like we all have failings. We mess up. Like I have. Fuck up in your life. just got to dust yourself off and keep trying to be that person. Like that's how it works. You keep trying. People recognize that too. They see it. They're like, oh, he keeps trying, even though it's hard. And I think sometimes we don't give enough credit to ourselves or to other people doing that. Or actually, I think we give it to other people. I think when we see other people trying, we're like, wow, really trying. But you don't see it sometimes in yourself. And maybe that doesn't feel like enough. I know I've done that. And I think a lot of guys do that at different times in their life.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to be very hard on yourself. Right. And just cop it. You know what? I'll just cop it. Yeah. And it raises an interesting point. I think we can give it to others when we see it in our lives. And maybe this has been one of the challenges with COVID. We can almost not, when things are virtual, that's when it's often easier to put on the comparison and the judgment lenses and be a little bit harsher to others. But when you're actually in community and in relationship with others, of course, right? Like acknowledging other humans is kind of like, it's hard not to do almost.
Feels much more, yeah, right. That's such an important point, Mike. It feels much more natural in a live environment. When it's just a screen, like we just turn into like, I had to keep reminding myself the past 5 years, like what it would have. So regardless of politics and everything, could you imagine being a politician?
Yeah.
First of all, the whole country was on fire.
Yeah.
And you have to everyone's going, solve it. And you're like, this is unprecedented. I don't know. This is a really hard problem.
What am I going to do?
I'm exhausted. I've just been campaigning. I needed to have a holiday with my wife and kids. So my wife who really needed to spend some time with me went on a holiday. The whole country hated him. Right or wrong, I personally as a leader wouldn't have gone on holiday when the country was on fire. Right? Like personally, that wasn't.
But even that is a beautiful piece of context, right? Like we just got to get the campaign done. We're just going to get to the end. Promise you love. We'll go and have a holiday after that. And it's like bingo, worst move you could have done. For context, for those outside of Australia, when the Australian bushfires happened, the Prime Minister went on holiday to Hawaii with his family.
With his family. So look, I have lots of opinions about that, but as a human being, I'm like, I get it. Like, he didn't see his family for a year, kind of thing. So they're like, just get it in now. It's Christmas. It's fine. The bushfire is probably not that bad. Worst bushfire we ever had. So that happens. And then, so you're dealing with that. And then when it stopped, we kind of stopped thinking about it if you live in a city, but they were still doing a lot of work, right? It's still ongoing. Yeah. It hasn't stopped.
Yeah, you're not seeing it on the news every night, but homes and townships and communities are still destroyed.
Yeah, and they're working through this backlog of stuff. And then, I don't know, 6 months, 9, whatever it was, not very long later, they go, pandemic, you've got to make a decision to shut down the country. Right, wrong, like whatever you believe, whatever the thing is that you got off a rabbit hole, like whatever. Like if you had to make that decision, it's really hard. Especially if you've had no rest from an election campaign and then there was a fire and then, everyone was like yelling at you for being a bad person. And then you got to work out this pandemic thing, which no one had really thought about that much. Like some experts in the field had, and they had really good, Australia had set up a way to think about this problem in advance, which was awesome. We had thought about it, but when it comes and you got to make the decision, it's pretty hard. And then everybody's just hammering you again. They did, the guy in Melbourne, whatever his name is, he did a press conference every day for like 65 days or something. He go down the stairs and nearly killed himself because he's exhausted. I just feel these people. Then what was the thing? Oh yeah, we've just had the floods. So you can get really upset at everyone and forget these are just people trying to make decisions, and we abstract politicians from that. In Australia, we eat our leaders. It's crazy. Like they can be good, bad, like lots of different stuff. We should hold them to a high standard, but also there's got to be a level of respect for, wow, you're the one that had to make those decisions. I didn't. I was like watching Netflix, ordering Uber Eats, and
is that the level of your decision necessity at the moment?
Yeah.
I know it's an interesting one, right? Because there's there regardless of where you are, I imagine there's got to be incredibly suitable people for those jobs, but also potentially coupled with no desire to do it. And so
I was like, who's going to put their hand up to be a politician now? Like, you're only going to get people that are very power hungry. Everybody else is like, why would I ever expose myself to these people, the media and Australian people? Because we're not very nice to leaders. We eat them. Like, it's very easy to abstract to like it's their fault. It's like, no, you get the leaders that you choose, and you get the leaders like who lead people that reflect them. And it's a hard thing to sit with and go, oh, they're a reflection of us. That's the reality. They reflect us. Like that's what we are, So,
and I suppose that, again, that could be something that's hard or maybe confronting to face. And then it's like, oh shit, okay, what do I do about this? Right. And I suppose that brings us back to the point of like, well, how are you showing up in your life and in your community?
yeah, that's the
Because
thing.
you know what? It actually really fucking matters on a small scale.
Yeah.
Now, that might not change how the government responds to the next natural disaster, which it would seem is probably around the fucking corner. But like, it makes a difference in your life and in some people's lives. And that actually might, make big difference somewhere over time, right? Be a good ancestor.
Be a good ancestor. That's, I think that's a good principle, Mike.
Yeah, it's not mine, so don't feel like I made it up.
I thought you made it.
No,
I was just
I'm not sure if I have too many original ideas. No, but like having been in New Zealand recently, for an extended time, there has been a different level of, like I left New Zealand originally when, like 2006 or something, and I've been back, of course, but like to spend an extended period of time there, it was a different stage in life. And I have a daughter, and my daughter is part Maori, and so this is it was I couldn't not, even though I wanted to, I couldn't not see the country from a different lens and look at Maori and like everything that speaks to, which I really don't know that much in the big scheme of things, but this idea of culture and what's in there, like if nothing else, I do feel like really calling to me, like there's something in here, to learn about and to learn from, and how we show up in our lives individually and then in our communities.
There really is. There really is, and the joy in it too. That's the other thing. We're so busy, we're losing the joy of that. Like there's a lot of joy being in community, and like the feeling of contribution, the feeling of being with your people, all of those things. We're kind of like losing the experience of that, I think. And that's what I mean, it's
where you go?
Sorry. Yeah, that's what I used to say with Barry. It was like, this guy, chippy, working class dude, like having a bunger out the back, like before we get the training or whatever, like such a legend, but just a joy-filled guy, because he was contributing all the time. Like his life was just this cycle of like giving and receiving. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's it, right? Like it's also so fundamentally human to be in the community. Like that's how it's so central to how we evolved to go, anthropology geek on it, right? And it's something that we've often now reduced down to maybe one partner and our immediate, family, nuclear family, which is a lot to put on the fact that humans need, multiple, not a million, but multiple relationships, to nourish us, right? And meet different needs and so on.
Yeah, it's kind of like we have like this really tiny scale, and then we have this weird like 1,000 to 5,000 person internet scale. But the scale that we really need, which is like 30 or whatever it is, 50, 100, like 100 people, let's say, that you're kind of interfacing with, we don't have access to it so much,
Yes.
And that's what, like, I think like groups, like, that's why it's great being in a coaching group. Like the groups do with 20 people or 30 people or 10 people or whatever the number is, we get to see them like on a level. And it's quite revelatory, because you see yourself on 10 times or 20 times as well. And you learn parts of you that maybe you haven't been able to excavate yet. And it's really nice, because sometimes it's hard to excavate it on your own. Like, very difficult thing to look at. Your blind spot, like, because it's back here and you don't know where it is. But other people can see it. They're looking right at it, and you can see it in them, and you're like, that too.
And you know what? I just connected to something that I've never put together before. But like, we talk about blind spots, and people will mirror stuff back. Well, obviously, I mean, if you're holding a mirror to me, then the mirror allows me to see what's also behind me in the blind spot. Right?
I can see everything in the blind spot. Yeah.
So, okay, I want to tangent into that a little bit with the time we've got left, and that's this. So, I'm kind of skipping into things with a bit of context, but like, I know with your business, it's something that you, in part, I don't know the ins and outs of it right now, but you in part run with your ex-partner.
Yeah.
And you both have different relationships. So one of the things that seems to be incredibly common these days is running some part of, or needing to run some part of your life with an ex-partner, and often that's in the realms of co-parenting, and they're different. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about more so is like having a mature and let's just say somewhat, and you can choose to change that word if you want, effective relationship with your ex partner? Because like I understand on some level it's a business, and so if a business doesn't run, you got to eat.
Yeah.
Right. And then I imagine that impacts all the stuff that you're talking about, in Fiji and the projects and so on. So can you kind of explore that a little?
Yeah, look, it is like a 4-dimensional relationship challenge.
Yes.
I think for everybody involved, not just
Yeah.
you. It's you're asking, I think, other people to experience and manage in some way your relationship too, and that's a tricky thing. I think I'm really fortunate that even when things went south in our personal relationship and stuff happens, right, and you're going through it, there always remained a level of respect and care for one another. I think that was the foundational piece, is that no matter how either of us felt on the personal level, there was always like, you're just a good person. I care about you. I want the best for you. Oh, some stuff feels in conflict. Other people have their opinions. All that stuff's going on. But I really admire and honor that both of us, we had each other's back at different times. And I think that's really important. Like, even when you're in conflict, to still have each other's back as best you can. And you mess up, and that's not always perfect. But that was a big part of it. Was I did feel at different times. I also felt let down, and I know that she probably felt let down too. That 100% is the case. But there was some core of like, life has changed, our relationship has changed, but there's still some kind of respect here for who you are. I know you. Like, we had 10 years of life together. Like, I know you. And I know when you're hurt, and I know when you're scared, and I know when you're sad. Things didn't work out, which is sad. But we have this crazy, amazing business that we built together. That's something beyond us, Like, this business isn't us. It was built and it's crucible together. We have staff. There's like 25 staff. There's hundreds of clients. There's like 10 years of work here that has a meaning and a significance beyond our personal relationship. So we both really, I think, when things were rocky between us, the belief in what we built in the company was much stronger than the rockiness. And that was, for a little while, that was keeping it together. But progressively, we worked out what safe felt like in communication. We worked out channels to communicate that were safe enough for our partners as well, because that's a tricky thing, As a new partner, I have a partner, like, how do they feel about us working in close quarters, So we had to work out a communication channel that felt like that's safe. That didn't feel safe. Okay, let's not do that. We have to respect the new boundaries that exist for your partner, my partner. We also had to, at different times, respect, hey, this is too much load for the staff. Like, it's not their job to buffer our life. We also have really next level staff. Like, we've got a communication expert that works in the company, Dan O'Ban. We have a neuropsych that is now a partner in the company. So we had high level help as well. Like, we weren't just fluking our way through this by being nice people. That didn't work in the relationship. It would not have worked in business. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was kind of, we probably needed a high level help while we're still in a relationship if that was going to be successful. But it wasn't an effort. So then it's like, we have a company, what are we going to do? And we made a strategic plan and worked out what's the biggest risk. It's us not being interested, or this fracturing. And then we work with a neuropsych, and we work with a communications expert to go, how do we have not have a terrible personal experience for us and our partners and our friends and family? And so we worked with her for a long period of time on getting that worked out. And then we worked with a communication expert to go, when we can't speak, because there was a period of time, probably a month or 2 months, where we just weren't able to communicate. How do we have a method of communication that doesn't sink the team, is respecting privacy and safety for us, but allows the rest of the team to operate and do their job? And that required like communication theory, basically, to work it out. And I'm really proud of the work that we did with Dan and Michelle to make that possible for everyone, to keep the company afloat. Our general manager, Katarina, was amazing through that time where there was really limited communication because stuff was going on. And we navigated that really tricky, I'd say, as a month or 6 weeks. And then we worked out, again, and I honor the relationship from the past and the present that we have, where we worked out, okay, this is safe enough to keep communication lines open. And it was fragmentary for a while, and now it's great. We've worked out, how do we do this? How does it work for everybody? I think our partners feel safe enough to keep navigating, and they're okay with it. And the company's growing. And the realization is, this is both of our great work. We put our heart and soul into it for a decade. We're both high achieving people, athletes in different fields, studied our field, training and coaching and all these things really hard, invested like millions of dollars in the company so that we could have a really high level coaching business. It would be crazy to sink it at the time where we're just about to start having more influence in the world, helping more people, and making money for all the risk and time and effort that we've put into it, to that, because we couldn't work out how to communicate. When we're here to help people communicate, that would have been probably a failure of mission more than anything else, So, but mate, it's like, if you don't get it right, don't feel bad, because it's pretty hard at different times, like anyone else is watching, like if you didn't manage it, get it. It's hard. It's pretty hard.
Yes.
And we had really high level help. I had a lecturer in senior lecturer in communications and a very well educated neuropsych on staff working with us all the time. That's how we do it,
Yeah. Nice. I like that. And look, maybe not everyone has those resources because, it might be your relationship and it's co-parenting and that kind of thing. But, two things there's a lot in there, but I think two things are really jumping out to me. And one was the first thing you said, essentially, which was respect, right? Like, look, at some point, there was a level of respect there, one would hope, when it comes to a relationship. And so while there might be a bunch of shit in the way, can we get back to at least seeing that? Right, because if there's something here like our children or whatever it is that need this to go well, one may hope, then how can we tap into some of that again? And then I think the other thing being knowing where our limitations are and what support we need in order to do that as best we can, right? And then of course working within limits of what's available and your resources and all that stuff.
Yeah. And look, that's the thing. It's like finding what's available is the first, like naming that, like maybe you can't solve it, the two of you, just like on your own, beating your head against the wall. Like there might be third parties that need to be engaged, and they could be at any type of level. It could just be a counselor, could be a trusted third party. It could be, don't make it a lawyer. They're like, they're going to make it a conflict-based resolution. You'll need legal representation, but don't make them the ones that help you navigate
the humanness.
The humanness, they are going to ruin it for you. Lawyers and accountants, you need them like to advise you. They should not run your human life. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good piece of advice.
Yeah, like get a human to help you with the human part. Navigate that as much as you can, and when you need to know how you get protected, talk to your accountants and your lawyers.
Yeah, but also, like what I'm getting in that as well is, like the idea of like having some structure so we can be free in the rest of it, right? And then that's kind of speaking to that, like, because to neglect that stuff would make it all harder and probably bring some of that shit into it. So, bring the structure to that, but don't let it bleed over to.
I'll give you an example.
Helping you on that one.
I'll give you an example that's not a disclosure. It's just a method. So. We worked out that communication wasn't going to work on phone calls or text message because it felt too private for people in our lives. But what will work, we use Signal, which is like an app for work. So anything, and we're very clear at work as well. Like this is another interesting thing. You got to understand what your boundaries are and what roles you're in different times. So as a digital company, we're like, we don't do work on email. We don't do work on text. We don't do work on any of these platforms. They're personal, they're private. So text message and phone call is for friends and family, not for work. So we don't talk on text or phone call. That's a private channel. We don't talk on WhatsApp or anything like that. If there's work stuff, we talk in work groups in Signal. And that's how it happens. And then we have work meetings on Zoom. These communication channels are for work, not private life. So that's safe for all of us, for me, for her, for partners and everything, because that's how we do work stuff. So a big part of it too was knowing what are our roles, how do we exist in those roles. Outside of that, that's not okay. That's different, And with that kind of a system, you go, okay, cool. I got to talk about some work stuff because that's communication's got to flow. I do that on Signal, or I put it in a group that we have for work. But outside of that, we're not using the other channels to talk. And that's just a practical way that you can think about your life in general. Like have some things for work and some things for your private life. Don't mess them all up. You have roles and responsibilities in different places,
Absolutely. I love it. A bit of structure brings the clarity, brings the freedom.
Clarity for everybody. Okay, that's okay. That's fine. We're great. Let's just do that. Stick to the rules.
I love it. Nick, I'm looking at the time and I realize we're going to have to wrap this up. So I want to end us there. Thank you for that. I know, look, that's potentially a very big topic, but at least we got a beautiful overview there, because I know that's something that a lot of people do, struggle with. A lot of us have had relationships in the end, and, how do we, if we need to, certainly maintain something there that at least is based in respect. So thank you for sharing that. And all of the beauty that's going on with you at the moment, and touching on the stuff in Fiji and the community. Yeah, I'm super inspired by that as well. And also, those stories that you share about, the footy club and your granddad and stuff like that. I take a lot of inspiration from those too. So thank you very much for sharing those.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the work you're doing with guys. I think it's important. Like I shared those stories. They're just two ordinary guys. It was my granddad and it was Barry that ran my footy club. And men sometimes look past those men that were in their life that were really important, that you are too. And you can try to turn it into a million other things other than just be a great granddad, be a great Barry, like go to work and like support your kids in the footy team, and they'll be remembering you. Like the way I told that story, like that is one of the most significant things that ever happened to me, was them being in my life.
Yeah.
And that's available to all of us, man,
Hashtag be a good Barry.
Be a good Barry.
I love it. I think we'll end there. Nick, Bradley-Qalilawa, thank you so much.
Mike, appreciate you, man. See you, bro.
You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. If this podcast has benefited you, if you enjoyed this, then my request, my invitation is to share this with a man that you think will also benefit from this and enjoy this. Remember, please, wherever you find your podcast, to like us, subscribe to us, click download first, leave us a review. All those things both make sure you get all the updates when they come in, and it supports us in getting this podcast in front of more everyday men that could use it. Until next time, I've been Mike Campbell. Remember to build that legendary integrity, and remember, everyday men, we thrive when we are championed, when we are supported, when we are appreciated and recognized for who we choose to be in the world. Here is my invitation to both show up and be that everyday legend.